Okay, let's talk about Huawei optimizers. So this is part 2 of a 4-part series that I'm doing about optimizers and micro-inverters. The last video I did was about the Tigo optimizer, and I talked about the pros and cons of that product. Huawei is a very similar product. Next time we're going to talk about Enphase micro-inverters, and we'll also talk about SolarEdge optimizers too, and just giving you the pros and cons of each of these products. Now, who the heck is Huawei, you might ask? And it was only 3 years ago that I learned how to pronounce the name Huawei. It's quite a difficult one, but you've probably heard of them by now. You might have first seen them on TV advertising their mobile phones. It turns out they are the second biggest manufacturer of mobile phones in the world, only second to Samsung, and they produce more mobile phones than Apple do. They only have around about a 10% market share here in Australia. But you probably know someone who has a Huawei phone, you just didn't even realize that. Now, on top of that, they are actually the biggest inverter manufacturer in the world. That's right, the biggest solar inverter manufacturer. They, again, only have a fairly small market share here in Australia, but internationally for quite a few years, they've been really big on utility scale solar, solar farms and commercial solar. And they've kind of really just started to break into the residential market with the Huawei residential inverter that ties with this Huawei optimizer. Now, a couple of years ago, I wrote a fairly in-depth review about the Huawei inverter, and Huawei then invited me over to visit their headquarters in the south of China. I checked out those headquarters and then went to one of their European towns, which is actually their R&D center, and it's phenomenal. It's only been built in the last half a dozen years or so. And you go there and you just feel like you're in Europe. They've just copied all the buildings there, and that is their R&D center where they attract people from all over the world, the best people in their field to live and work in this R&D facility, which is just ridiculously beautiful. So they're a really massive moving and shaking company. But you may have also heard some of the not so positive stories about Huawei. ScoMo, before he was the Prime Minister, banned Huawei 5G from entering the Australian telecommunication market, and that has caused a lot of tension, and a lot of this tension between Australia and China at the moment is around this 5G ban that the government has imposed on Huawei. But it's not just us. Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of the CEO and the founder of Huawei, was arrested in Canada last year when she was transiting through there. And she was arrested under the request of the US government to do with bank fraud or something like that. But obviously it's got to do with tensions between Huawei and the US government as well. And in fact, last year, the US Senate called for a ban on Huawei inverters themselves because they feared that, like with the Huawei's ties to the Chinese government and the Chinese military, they're concerned that there could be hacking into these inverters and Huawei could actually interrupt the power supply in the United States. So there's a whole lot of controversy that you can go down with Huawei, and you can go down a little bit further to that rabbit hole if you choose to on the internet. But what we're talking about today is the Huawei optimizer and its technical capabilities, and it is really wrapped up in the whole ecosystem of the Huawei inverter, and we'll talk a little bit about the Huawei residential solar battery as well. So why would you get Huawei optimizer anyway? What do they do? Okay, so these little gadgets, basically we put them up behind every solar panel or solar panels to make that solar panel apparently perform better. And so I'm going to cover 4 reasons why optimizer manufacturers say you may want to get an optimizer. And the first reason they may say, I don't think Huawei say this, but it increases your production even if you don't have shade. Well, that's kind of a silly statement because Huawei optimizers actually consume power, or any optimizer will consume power. So if you don't have any shade or any soiling or any mismatch of your panels, this actually reduces your power. So if, let's say for example, you had ridiculously dirty panels and one panel was a lot dirtier than the other, or you had some real cheap Chinese garbage panels and one's producing 275 watts, so even though it's clean, and the other one's producing 315 watts, even though, when they're both clean, well then yeah, Huawei optimizer will help that situation, because that's kind of like a shaded situation if they're not running well. But I think if you, in the first place, get a decent quality panel, make sure they're relatively clean, then you're not going to have any need for an optimizer at all unless you have shade. Now, the other reason that people say that you should use optimizers or micro-inverters behind every panel is for panel level monitoring, and we've got to keep that panel honest because they've given us a 25-year performance warranty, and what if it degrades quicker, and what if that panel fails? We want to be able to pick up if that panel has failed. Well, you'll be able to pick it up most likely without an optimizer in the first place, but an optimizer is going to have a much higher chance of failing, so it's stupid to put a box of electronics in the sun on your roof expecting that not to fail in the next 25 years. Panel level monitoring is not a good idea, but I'm going to go a little bit further and say optimizer monitoring is a good idea, and that's one of the reasons that I like Huawei optimizers is they monitor themselves, so you can tell if you've got a burnt out Huawei optimizer or not. So in the last video I talked about Tigo and about how Tigo optimizers were failing, and it was quite difficult for us to go into the Fronius monitoring and identify that optimizer had actually failed. Where with Huawei, if we just put 2 optimizers up on your roof and selectively deploy that, I'll explain that in a minute. If we do that and we have a Huawei inverter with it, it'll come up on the Huawei monitoring platform how each of these panels and more importantly, how each of these optimizers are performing. So it's a fairly good thing that we are monitoring these weak points on your roof to see if they're failing. But I still haven't given you a very good reason for why you would install them in the first place. And the reason is if you have shading on your roof. Now, I'm going to caveat that and say if you have partial shading is where I recommend any kind of optimizer. So if you have shading on maybe a quarter of your panels or something like that, and this is a real design thing, but if you've got shading on a minimal number of your panels, then you may want to put 4 or 6 optimizers on your roof. It's a cost-effective solution of dealing with that shade, but also if you have heavy shade and you need to put it on all 20 or 30 panels on your roof, Enphase is definitely the best solution for a technical reason, for a higher production reason, but also for a longevity reason. I'll cover that a little bit more in my Enphase review. The fourth reason that people say is safety and talking about panel level shutdown. So now let's say if you have a fire, not started by your solar system, a fire started in your kitchen or something like that at lunchtime, and it starts burning through your walls and it burns into the cable that's running down from your solar panels down to your switchboard. If you have a standard string system, you'll have 400 volts running through your house that can potentially be burnt, and that will be a bigger source of ignition for your house that's already burning down anyway. Okay, but if you have optimizers on your roof, you can technically shut down every panel individually, so you no longer have 400 volts coming down your roof, but you just have 40 volts at every panel. So that's what they say. Now, the problem around this is that only works if you fully deploy optimizers on your roof. And I've just suggested that fully deploying any optimizer on your roof is not the best idea for production and for longevity. However, I've got to say that sometimes we will fully deploy optimizers on a roof, and that is mainly due to cost. So even though I've got these technical reasons why I don't like fully deploying optimizers or putting optimizers on every single panel on a shaded roof, sometimes it's not a bad solution and it's a more affordable solution too. So you've always got to weigh up, the technical benefits versus the cost of the system, obviously. Okay, I've told you that the Huawei optimizer is really part of this Huawei ecosystem, and even though these optimizers will work on any inverter, Huawei don't warrant it that way, so I'm not even going to discuss that really as an option. So you really are going to tie it to a Huawei inverter. So Huawei inverters, what's on the offering here? We've got a 2, 3, 4, a 4.6, a 5, and a 6 kilowatt single phase inverter. So the biggest inverter we have is 6 kilowatts single phase, if you're going to tie it with these Huawei optimizers. Now, I'm sorry Huawei, that's just not really good enough. A very real minority of the systems we install today are sort of below that 8 kilowatt mark. So it really is getting to us to be a niche product that there's not many homes that we do, or maybe less than half of the homes we do use a 5 or 6 kilowatt inverter. And particularly for the extra features that Huawei will give you with their battery, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's not really the small homeowners that are going to spend that discretionary spend on a battery that they didn't really need in the first place. Now, there is another obvious limitation to the Huawei inverter, and that is the input current limitation. And what it really means is there's a massive design limitation. So let's say you've got a roof where we want to put panels on your north and your east and your west. Well, you can't do that with the Huawei inverter unless you put optimizers on every panel. And let's say you've got a roof where you want to put, let's say 24 panels, and you want to put 14 on the north and then 10 on the west. Well, you can't do that with Huawei again, because those 14 panels we would have to parallel as 7 and 7, which increases the current, which we cannot do on the Huawei inverter. So there is a massive design limitation with this inverter, as well as the fact that the biggest inverter that we can get is only a 6 kilowatt single phase inverter. Now, a lot of people get attracted to the Huawei inverter because it is a really cost-effective or affordable, they would think, hybrid inverter, which means later on you can go and plug in a LG battery or even a Huawei battery down the track. Now, yeah, this is good, but I've already talked about the cons, the downsides of the Huawei inverter. But the other thing is, if you buy this inverter, which is cheaper, by the way, than a standard non-hybrid Fronius inverter, it's a fairly affordable inverter, but it does not have EPS built in. EPS is emergency power supply, or basically blackout protection. If you have a blackout with your standard Huawei inverter or your hybrid Huawei inverter, and you have an LG battery or a Huawei battery next to it, you don't automatically have blackout protection. Instead, Huawei have come up with this fantastic afterthought. Their inverter, by the way, is around about this size, pretty small. They have an EPS box, which is huge and ugly, that we have to mount beside it so that your inverter will stay on in case of a blackout. So this blackout protection was really an afterthought. People are going to be disappointed when they buy this Huawei inverter, that they go to buy a Huawei or an LG battery and they find out that they don't have power in a blackout, because that is the main feature, I believe, in having a battery in the first place. Now, I mentioned that you can couple it with the LG battery and the Huawei battery, and I'm loving that idea of coupling it with a Huawei battery. However, that Huawei battery has not been released yet. It'll be released sometime in early 2021. We don't know the cost of it. We don't know what the warranty is going to be like. Are they going to give us a 10-year warranty with, almost one cycle that we can do every day? Or are they going to do what SunGrow did and give us just a 5-year warranty with it? We're still to see with that. So I guess all in all, it's probably a great product. It's probably a reliable product for what it is, and it's a fairly affordable product. But I think it's so niche, and there's so few situations that we can use it in. And I've kind of got this feeling that it's going to be sold by these cheap companies that are installing rubbish panels on your roof and rubbish systems installed by subcontractors at a bargain basement price, and the consumer is kind of thinking they've ticked the battery ready box, and they've got that for a great price, but they don't realize that they've been really limited on the solar that they can get on their roof. They've been really limited with the features or the flexibility of this inverter, and that they're not going to have blackout protection unless they spend an extra, who knows what it's going to be, $500 or $1,000 on getting that box installed also. So to be honest with you, we've installed a few Huawei inverters, and they're right for their very niche situation, but there's so many. I think there's a much better options out there, even though it is coupled with a Huawei battery, which I think is important to keep those brands together so that we don't have any warranty issues or warranty fights down the track. I still think that the Huawei inverter is kind of a very niche situation at the moment, and not suitable for too many customers, in my opinion. Now, what do you think about the Huawei inverter, and more importantly, the Huawei optimizer? Have I been too harsh? Is this a great product, and there's heaps of customers out there that want a 6 kilowatt inverter with a Huawei battery with optimizers? It sounds like a great package right up front, and maybe the EPS box, the extra money that you have to pay for that and the ugliness of it, maybe that's not an issue to you. These are only my opinions. I'm only telling you the way that I see it. Let me know down below in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this review of Huawei optimizers, give us a thumbs up. I'm doing many more blogs, and we're going to talk about Solar Edge and Enphase later. So subscribe to this if you're interested in the future content, and hit that little notification button so you get a notification when I put my next video out. Thanks for watching and catch you next time.